Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Henderson Speaks event tonight. We're grateful for you to come out. We are grateful that we have Judge Weller here. Just a few housekeeping items, as we always shamelessly do. HendersonHistoricalSociety.org. Tell your friends, neighbors, family, whoever, get on the website. If you're not a member, it's $25 a year. We do very good with these Henderson Speaks events. They're always enlightening to us. So please, we're really kind of hurt. We say this each time that COVID really hurt our membership numbers, as I guess a lot of other things, but we're back on the rebound, getting more and more members as we speak. This evening, if it's all right, I'd like to introduce Councilwoman-elect Monica Larson. Would you stand up, from Ward 2 here in Henderson? And we congratulate you, and we look forward to working with you and good things on the Henderson City Council. Also, I've heard that Councilwoman Carrie Cox is trying to come here. She's had a meeting that has kind of delayed her a little bit. As she comes in, maybe we'll just kind of acknowledge her somehow. I don't know, Mark, or Judge Weller won't know her, of course. But this will be the very last Henderson Speaks for this year. The holidays are coming up. We are going to have the fire truck in the Henderson Winterfest. Excited about that. The Clark County Heritage Museum on, I believe we said the 16th and 17th, anyway, 13th and 14th, have a little event where I guess it's kind of like a community outreach. We'll have a booth there trying to introduce ourselves to people that come. And then the next event we have will be in February, our next Henderson Speaks, and we'll have more information on that as the year begins. And so with this, I'm going to once again turn it over to Mark Hall-Patton, who I can't thank enough. He is the greatest guy in the world, world-renowned. People know him all over, and he still comes here and then sees these things for us, and we sure thank you for that. So,
happy to do it tonight, and just to let you know, on the 13th and 14th of December, that's Heritage Street Holidays at the County Museum. That's free. You get a chance to wander Heritage Street. You get to see the decorations and all of the historic structures at the museum. You can come down and join us, Judge, if you want to. I'm sure you want to fly down for that. There is also hot chocolate there. Whoa, what more could you ask? And so that's the evenings of the second Friday, Saturday of December. Do come out for that. There will be Santa there if you want your picture taken with Santa. No, it's not me. Didn't know that. Even though I have done that in the past, I've never done it for Heritage Street Holidays. It's my honor to introduce the judge, Judge Chuck Weller. Served as District Court Judge in Department 11 of the Family Division of the 2nd Judicial District Court from 2004 to 2020. There's a lot to that one. Yes, that's in Reno. So everybody knows that one. Maybe not down here. Prior to that, for 2 decades, he was an attorney in Reno. For 12 years, he hosted the renowned, did you know it was renowned? Oh, it was, yes. Radio show, Chuck Weller and the Law, on KKOH, which I take it was in Reno as well.
Yes.
It was, there we go. Also penned a weekly legal advice column for 3 years in the Reno Gazette-Journal. He obtained a PhD in judicial studies from the University of Nevada, Reno. A certain continuity there. And National Judicial College in December 2013. Also has a master's degree in judicial studies from May of 2009. Got his legal foundation at the Georgetown University Law School, where he got his Juris Doctorate in 1977. I don't know whether I should throw in all these dates.
Makes me sound kind of old.
Does it to me? sounds pretty normal to me, but that's all right. And was at St. Joseph's College in Philadelphia many years before that. He has published numerous articles covering diverse legal subjects, and those are all fine, but that's not why he's here. He's here because of this book, World War II and Nevada, the Silver State's Contribution to Victory. Obviously didn't have much to say on the subject, but we are going to really enjoy his talk, I think, tonight. Something that you need to know is he brought some books with him. The book is $55 if you want to buy it online, but for tonight only, it will be $40. So he has, I think, 14 copies with you. I know only 14 because he had 15, but I bought one. So he has 14 copies to sell tonight. So those will be for sale after his talk. Please hold your questions while he gives his talk. He will take questions at the end of the talk. So please hold your questions until the end. Now I'm going to turn it over to Judge Charles Weller.
And thank the Henderson Historical Society for having me down here to talk about World War II in Nevada. Thanks very much. If you don't mind, I'm going to take this jacket off. It's a little warm in here. So I'm going to talk to you about World War II, and I waited until everybody who remembered the war was gone so that nobody could contradict anything I've written. And so let me start out by saying World War II, isn't that a long time ago? What significance does it have today? Isn't that just history, like reading about the Peloponnesian War? No, it's not like the Peloponnesian War. As a result of the Second World War, a world structure was created that is still with us 80 years later. Okay? Things like the dollar as the world's reserve currency, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, America as the most powerful nation in the world. All of that is a direct outcome of the Second World War. And it's a world that we created, that the United States created. And there are people now who would like to change that world order, and we won't like it if they're successful, okay? Because we have benefited from that world order that was created after World War II, ever since World War II. World War II was the most recent event that changed the world order. Nothing like it has happened since Vietnam, Korea, communist takeover of China. Nothing has happened as significant for the way the world works since World War II. And I want to give you some background before I get into the story of what happened in Nevada. War came the way war usually comes. There were people who weren't satisfied with the way things were. The world order before World War II was largely one of colonialism. Western countries had colonized the entire world, and some people didn't like it. Germany was created late in European history, and it didn't have colonies all around the world like France did, like England did, like Holland did, like Portugal did, and Germany wanted to get into the game. And Japan wasn't happy either. Most Asian countries were colonies of the Western nations, and Japan didn't like that. Japan wanted to get rid of European domination in Asia. And so Germany and Japan became very aggressive. Most people say, most historians will say, that World War II started in 1939 in September, when Germany attacked Poland. When they did that, France and Great Britain, England, declared war on Germany, and most people look at that as the beginning of the Second World War. Shortly thereafter, within 100 days, Germany invaded, occupied, conquered Brussels, France, Holland, Norway, Denmark, almost all of Europe. In Europe, England was alone. The United States was not part of the war. In more or less the same period of time, Japan conquered most of the coast of China and Indochina, what we call now Vietnam. America wasn't in the war, but most people in the United States, although they wanted to stay out of the war, knew which side we were on. We were opposed to what Japan was doing, and we were opposed to what Germany was doing. There were a couple of things about the war that were universal. One thing is this. It didn't start this way. The draft crept up, but by the time the war was over, Americans could be drafted who had only one eye, or were deaf in one ear, or who had no teeth, or missing a thumb, or 3 fingers. This tells you a couple of things. One thing it tells you is the opportunities for people who weren't young men really expanded in the United States. The young men in their late teens or early 20s were gone. They weren't in society anymore. And the jobs that they would have filled were empty. And so who took those jobs? People that weren't allowed to take those jobs before. Women, blacks, Hispanics took those jobs. Another thing that this tells you is it was an all-out war. Everything was on the table. It was a total war. The involvement in the war touched every individual. The nation was just coming out of a Great Depression. It wasn't a rich country like it is today. When we went to war, there wasn't enough food to feed everybody in the United States and our troops overseas. And so food was rationed in the United States. You had ration stamps, and you could buy so much sugar, and you could buy so many canned goods, and when you bought your limit, you couldn't get any more. Everything was rationed. At the beginning of the war, automobiles were limited to 4 gallons of gasoline a week. Before the war was over, automobiles were limited to 2 gallons of gasoline a week. Unless you were a doctor or a first responder, you didn't drive anywhere. Not only that, automobiles weren't manufactured in the United States during the war because we needed those factories to make tanks and guns. Just about everything was rationed. Clothing, shoes, tires, just about anything you could imagine was rationed. There wasn't enough metal to make the implements of war that we needed. And so there were scrap drives. You gave your aluminum pots and pans. You gave your rubber hose. You gave your silk stockings. You donated these things to the war. The people in the United States, not just Nevada, but everywhere, were expected to sacrifice for the war, and the nation did. Now we refer to that generation as the greatest generation, and there's justification for doing that. I think the greatest justification, though, is probably the fact that we were a constitutional democracy. The men and women in Japan, the men and women in Germany sacrificed just as much for their armed forces as we did. But we were victorious, and we were morally superior. I want to talk about Nevada specifically. Nevada had a lot of things going for it. One thing that it had going for it is it wasn't on the Atlantic or on the Pacific coast. You might know, you probably know, that America entered the war after Japan bombed Hawaii at Pearl Harbor. Well, the people of the military leaders in the United States and the citizens of the United States were frightened to death that the West Coast was going to be invaded. In fact, they thought it was invaded a few different times. People would see attack planes flying over the cities. Didn't happen. There was actually a little bit of attack on the West Coast, but not much. But the military wanted to move things away from the coast. And the Sierra Nevada mountains provided a great buffer. And so many military facilities were located in Nevada. Not only was it a mountain range away from the Pacific Ocean, but it also had attributes, Nevada did, that made it beneficial for the military. Instead of fog, our skies are blue almost all the time. We have huge uninhabited areas where if you want to practice with the most lethal weapons that exist, you can do that without hurting anybody. If you're teaching people to fly, we've got plenty of dry lake beds that people can land in. It's forgiving. The population of the state of Nevada at that time was 110,000. That was at the 1940 census set. It just so happens that Nevada also is composed of 110 square miles. The population of Nevada was 1 person per square mile at that time. I'm going to talk about Henderson, but before I get there, I want to give you some context. I want to describe to you a little bit else about what was going on in the state. So I'm briefly going to tell you what was going on in Reno, and what was going on in Fallon, and what was going on in Wendover, and in Hawthorne, and in Tonopah. And when I'm finished that, I'm going to get down here into Clark County. These are B-25 bombers. They're flying over Lake Tahoe. There was an air base built north of Reno that's today called Stead. It was called the Reno Airfield at the time. Let me tell you why these bombers were flying over Lake Tahoe. Because of this. China was an American ally, but Japan had taken possession of all the port cities on the coast of China. And so in order to supply our ally with munitions and food and other things that they needed, we needed to fly those munitions into them from India. And in order to get from India to China, you have to cross the Himalayan mountains, the largest mountain chain in the world. Okay? Where in the United States could you practice to fly across the hump? That's what they called it, flying the hump. Where could you practice flying the hump? In Reno, Nevada, flying over the Sierra Nevada mountains. Other things happened at that base, but that was one of them. In Fallon, Nevada, the Navy had a base where pilots were taught to do everything that they could do in the American fleet. And in fact, they still can. Top Gun, you've probably seen the movie. For the last 28 years, Top Gun has been in Fallon, Nevada. One thing that they did in Fallon during the war, at a lake near Fallon called Pyramid Lake, is they trained Navy pilots to drop torpedoes in the water to sink ships. At the end of the war, there were about 13 million pounds of munitions on the shore, lake shore. And what do you do in 1945? If you want to get rid of a bunch of explosives, you dump them into the lake. And years later, they were forced to recover everything from the lake. Another thing about Fallon is these two guys. Wayne Ben Voorhees is the guy in the civilian clothes. Wayne Ben Voorhees grew up in Fallon. He went to war. He was in the Philippines when the war started. He was taken prisoner by the Japanese, and he died in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. His brother, Bruce Van Voorhees, when he learned that his brother was missing in action in the Pacific, asked to be assigned there. He was a pilot, and he flew a mission one day with a crew of 9 and attacked the plane attacked alone a Japanese base and destroyed lots and lots of things, and it was a suicide mission, and his plane blew up and everybody was killed, and Bruce Van Voorhees was awarded the Medal of Honor. There were less than 500 medals of honor awarded to the entire military forces of the United States during the war. Bruce Van Voorhees was Nevada's only recipient. This is a monument in Wendover. Wendover is in far western, northwestern Nevada. Wendover, Nevada is a desolate place. Okay. The population of Wendover when the war started was about 120. 20,000 men were assigned there. It is a very desolate place. Bob Hope, the comedian, went to Wendover, looked around, and suggested that the place be renamed Leftover. So isolate was Wendover that when they decided that they were going to drop the atomic bomb, Wendover is where they decided they were going to train people for that mission. And this is a monument in Wendover, Nevada. Wendover is an odd place. It's half in Nevada and half in Utah. And in Utah, lots of things are sins that in Nevada are businesses. And so, even though most of the base was in Utah, most of the recreating that went on happened in Nevada. But in any event, the group that trained for dropping the atomic bomb was called the 509th Composite Group, and this monument to the 509th exists in Wendover. This is Morris Jepson. You might recognize the plane, the Enola Gay. That's the plane that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Morris Jepson's from Carson City, a physicist. Morris Jepson was on the Enola Gay. He was the last person to touch the bomb and carried his fingerprints as it dropped out of that plane and exploded into history. Okay. Now I'm taking you down to central Nevada, and we're in the town of Hawthorne. Hawthorne, Nevada, then and now, is the site of the largest arsenal in the world. Okay? The arsenal for the Navy used to be in New Jersey. It blew up, killed a bunch of people. They were looking for a place to move the arsenal. They wanted to move it into the west because of the big expanses and little population. At the same time, California wanted the Golden Gate Bridge. We had a senator, Senator Oddie, who had a report prepared that said if you build the Golden Gate Bridge and the American fleet is inside the Golden Gate Bridge and it's knocked down in the event of war, the fleet won't be able to get out. And if the fleet's outside in the event of war, if the bridge is knocked down, the fleet won't be able to get back to base. The California delegation was not happy about that. They went to Senator Oddie and a deal was struck. California got the Golden Gate Bridge. Nevada got the arsenal at Hawthorne. Hawthorne supplied almost all of the munitions used by the Navy in the Pacific War. So when you hear about the big battles of Midway and Leyte Gulf and anything else, if you know anything about the war, we of course used lots of ammunition, and most of it came out of Hawthorne, Nevada, and Hawthorne, Nevada still cranks up in every war. Cranked up for Korea, cranked up for Vietnam, cranked up for Desert Storm, and will in the future crank up for the future wars, which unfortunately we are doomed to participate in. Because the men were gone, women workers were wanted at the depot and can be ordnance men. And here's a picture of a woman producing rockets for a device called a hedgehog. A hedgehog was something that you'd mount on a ship. It would shoot out 24 30-pound bombs in a pattern and sink beneath the sea, and it was designed to sink submarines. When I saw this picture at first, I thought, this can't be real. She's dressed nicely, her shoes are off, I think she might be wearing some jewelry, but I am assured, no, this is an actual picture of a woman working on building hedgehog rockets during the war. I've moved now into Clark County. This is an aerial photo of what today would be called Nellis Air Force Base. At the time, the public airport and the military airport shared the same area. What the military taught at what's called now Nellis was flexible gunnery. The idea of flexible gunnery is you'd be in an airplane, a bomber plane, and you'd have a 50 caliber or 30 caliber machine gun that was quite heavy, and it would be movable. And you were supposed to be able to move that gun on your plane, which was wildly maneuvering, and shoot at a fighter plane, which was wildly maneuvering, and try to figure out where the bullets were going to be to get the plane when the plane got there. That was called flexible gunnery. There were 7 flexible gunnery places, schools in the United States. The one at Nellis was the first. The people who at Nellis were called the Horned Toads, and this patch shows what they were, their mascot looked like. Another thing that happened here in Clark County was called the Desert Training Center. When America entered the war, the fighting in Europe was pretty much over. England was fighting the Germans in North Africa, which was a desert area. The United States needed to train men to fight in the desert. And where would you do that? So the Army turned to its chief tank commander, General Patton, and said, pick an area in the United States where people can train for fighting in the desert. And this whole area is called the Desert Training Center. Okay? And this part is in Arizona. And this part is in California. And this part is in Nevada. Everything south of Searchlight was part of the Desert Training Center. And you would think, well, that's not very much. It's 500 square miles. It was not a small area at all. More than 1 million men trained within the Desert Training Center, and many of them chose to recreate in Searchlight and this other city just a little bit north of that. I forget its name. Oh, there it is. Las Vegas. These are some people at the Desert Training Center. Another thing that you probably all know since you live down here is that Boulder Dam, you call it Hoover Dam today, but during the war they called it Boulder Dam, probably because there was a Democrat in the White House and Hoover was a Republican. But you're probably aware that there's a machine gun nest, a bunker up on the hill above this. Does everybody know about that bunker? Okay. I don't know if you've ever seen the inside of it. That's the inside. It's not open to the public. Maybe someday it will be. Snakes and tarantulas and stuff are a problem. This is Howard Eels. Eels or Eels?
Eels.
Eels. Howard Eels is the father of Henderson, Nevada. Okay, and I'm going to tell you his story. But before I get to Henderson, one more detour. In the middle of Nevada, at a place called the Gabbs Valley, a fellow named Harry Springer had located some mining claim for bruxite and mangasite, 2 ores that can be fashioned into magnesium. Harry Springer had fought for the United States during the First World War. And during the First World War, he was subjected to a mustard gas attack and suffered from it all the rest of his life. He located those claims in the 1920s. Shortly after that, he was approached by a German company called IG Farben. IG Farben wanted to buy his mining claims. And fortunately for the United States, Harry Springer did not sell them. Okay, so America got to use that magnesium for our war, and I.G. Farben went on to create a gas called Zyklon B that was used to kill Jews in Nazi concentration camps during the war. Okay. This is a letter from the president to Senator McCarran saying, listen, I've approved a magnesium plant in the state of Nevada. What happened was that after Eels bought the magnesium claims, he decided that he wanted to manufacture magnesium, but he didn't have any idea how to do it. All he knew is he had some claims. So he combined with a company from Britain that had a small plant producing magnesium that was looking for a place in the Western Hemisphere to make magnesium. And these two companies came together and formed Basic Magnesium, Inc. in January of 1941, about 11 months before Nevada entered, or the United States entered the war. In April of 1941, these guys went to Washington, D.C. and talked to the people in charge of preparing the United States for its war effort. President Roosevelt had already announced that America was to become the arsenal for democracy. We had a program called Lend-Lease, where we supplied weapons and other things necessary to our allies, China, England. After June of 1941, the Soviet Union. These were our allies, and Lend-Lease supplied these people with raw materials, tanks, airplanes, everything you could imagine. And this plant that was going to be built at what we call Henderson today, right here where we are, was part of that arsenal for democracy. Magnesium had certain qualities that were really important to a war effort in the mid-20th century. One is it's light and strong. A wheel assembly on an airplane that was built of steel weighed 1,000 pounds. The same assembly built of magnesium was about 240 pounds. Planes built of magnesium with a lot of magnesium pieces were lighter and could fly higher and could carry more bombs. Okay? Also, magnesium burns really intensely. Water can't put it out. And so incendiary bombs were made from magnesium. Also, magnesium, when it burns, produces a very bright light. And so star shells launched over battlefields that drifted down under parachutes would light up the battlefields. We needed magnesium and we didn't have enough. The estimate was that we needed to increase the production of magnesium in the United States by 9,000%. So when Eels and his compatriots went to Washington, D.C. and said, look, we've got the largest, purest mining area for magnesium ore in the United States and perhaps the world. And not only that, we've got this company from Great Britain that knows how to produce magnesium. Give us a chance. Let us get started. And they did. In April, they were back in Washington, D.C., and in July, they received this letter from the President of the United States, Senator McCarran did, that said, go ahead. The government paid for everything. The responsibility for BMI was twofold. And I said I was going to take another detour before I got to Henderson, and here's the detour. I'm going to take you to Gabbs first. They had to build a mine at Gabbs. Eels from Ohio had never built a mine before. The folks from Great Britain had never built a mine before. They didn't know what they were doing. They just went out and they did it. They built a mine at Gabbs. This is the mine. This is another shot of the mine. And they also needed to build a factory to make magnesium metal. And they didn't know much about that either. They knew they had a plant in Great Britain that produced small amounts of magnesium.
700 College Drive.
And so the plan that they came up with is, let's double that in size, and we'll build as many of them as necessary to satisfy the government's requirements. That was the plan. They had no money. The government said, we'll provide all the money and let this company with little experience go forward. At the time that the government decided to let them go forward, Basic Magnesium had been in existence for less than a year and had 17 employees. This is a picture of Henderson, Nevada on the 15th of September, 1941. This is a picture of Henderson, Nevada on the 16th of September, 1941. About 4 square miles of ground where had the sagebrush removed, the creosote brushes removed, to build 10 plants, twice the size of the plant that existed in Great Britain. Part of the deal that Senator McCarran and other representatives from Nevada were able to strike with the federal government was to build a water and electrical lines from Lake Mead to what we call Henderson today. At the time, there weren't very many people here. The 1940 census showed the population of Las Vegas to be about 8,000. The population of Clark County to be about 12,000. Okay? But this plant was built and was going to hire lots of people, and the population was booming. In an 8-month period from the end of 1941, 8 months after that, there were over 40,000 people living in Clark County. Many of those people were at the what we call Nellis today, and many of them came to build what's called BMI. Okay? At the time, the city of Los Angeles had a population of 1.8 million. Even though Clark County had about 40,000 people at this moment, they decided, our legislatures were able to convince the federal government to bring in enough electricity and water to satisfy a city the size of Los Angeles. And that's what they did. 14 miles from the dam to about where we are now, they built a 40-inch pipeline that would supply 1.8 million people, and electrical wires sufficient to provide electricity for 1.8 million people. And they assured the growth of not only Henderson, but also Las Vegas by doing that. If you count them, there are 10 of them. 10 of them, twice the size of the plant in Great Britain. This was Basic Magnesium, Inc. At the beginning, the ore from Gabbs, which had to come down to Henderson, went by rail. There were no north-south paved highways in the state of Nevada. There was no train line that directly connected North and South Nevada. There was no regular plane service between North and South Nevada. And in order to get the ore to Henderson from Gabbs, which is only about 340 miles as the mountain bluebird flies. Anybody know the state bird? The mountain bluebird. It's only about 340 miles, but the route by train through Ogden, Utah was 1,200 miles. And that's how the ore would get to Henderson. Until later, and I'm going to tell you the story in a little bit, but Anaconda Copper ended up taking over that plant from Eels, and they produced trucks that don't look too unusual today, but they were unusual at the time. And Wells Cargo used these trucks to transport the ore from Gabbs to Henderson, only 340 miles as opposed to 1,200 miles, with a tremendous cost savings. This is a picture of some of the production operation inside the magnesium plant. And of course, women were important at the magnesium plant as well. She's got a skirt on, looks nice, shaving magnesium ingots. Again, women working at the magnesium plant. You all probably know, because this is where you live, about the housing situation at Basic Magnesium Inc. When Basic Magnesium Inc. started, there wasn't housing for anybody. Okay, people were living all along the road between Las Vegas and what we call today Henderson, out in the desert, under bushes. 300 people were sleeping on the post office lawn in Los Angeles, or pardon me, in Las Vegas. Las Vegas, for the first time, installed parking meters because people were sleeping in their cars overnight, and so they installed parking meters so that that wouldn't happen any longer. The idea of where the housing was going to be built for the thousands of magnesium workers was a big political issue. As I mentioned a little earlier, the population grew by tens of thousands in just a few months. And the people of Las Vegas, the business leaders of Las Vegas, wanted those people to move into Las Vegas. They wanted them to shop there, to recreate there, to spend money there. These were well-paid people working at this magnesium plant, and Las Vegas wanted those people. Eels, who was still in charge of this company, didn't want his people to live in Las Vegas for some reasons that are apparent to anybody who calls the place Sin City. Okay, he wanted the people to live near the plant. And in addition, this was a time of gasoline rationing, tire rationing, cars weren't being manufactured. It was a long commute. So the government was asked to intercede, and the government decided that the workers should live close to the magnesium plant. And places like Anderson Camp, Pittman, you know, the places around here that later became Henderson, were built in the area. The senator from Las Vegas, there was a guy named Key Pittman who was a Nevada senator. He died. And I'm just trying to remember a name, and I'm terrible with names. Berkeley Bunker was appointed to be the senator. And Berkeley Bunker wanted to be reelected. He had to run for office in 1942. And Berkeley Bunker wanted the powerful people in Las Vegas to support him in the election. So when it was that there was a dispute of whether the housing was going to be in Las Vegas or be in the desert near Henderson, Bunker was on the side of the Las Vegas people. But the federal government decided, no, it makes a lot more sense to build that plant, build that housing near the plant in what we now call Henderson. Bunker never forgave Eels and hated him ever after and did everything he could to sabotage him. Okay, this is a picture of some of the housing there in this area. There was an executive order. This is a picture of Nevada's west, or Las Vegas west side. There weren't enough people. There just weren't enough people to operate this plant. There were two major war industries in the state of Nevada. One was Basic Magnesium, and the other was the arsenal at Hawthorne. To get people to work in these places, we needed to solicit groups that didn't previously participate in the economy. And as I said earlier, women and blacks. Where were we going to get blacks? From the American South. And so concerted efforts were made to recruit blacks in the American South. And many blacks came to both Hawthorne and Henderson, Las Vegas, from the American South. The census, the 1940 census showed that Nevada was 94% white. and only 4% American Indian, and less than 1% Black, Hispanic. Okay? So suddenly, Clark County, which had about 120 Black people in it in the 1940 census, had 3,000 Blacks arrive. And a similar thing happened in Hawthorne. And there was racism, even though the state hadn't had many Blacks before. There was racism because not only did Blacks come from the American South, but so did whites. And they brought their attitudes with them. And the racism pre-existed. In the 1920s, both Reno and Las Vegas had demonstrations by the Ku Klux Klan. In 1934, the Las Vegas Evening Review-Journal published an editorial in favor of lynching Black people who committed certain crimes. So, if you were Black moving to work at Basic Magnesium Inc., where were you going to live? Well, the Blacks that were already here lived on the west side in Las Vegas, and that's where Blacks migrated to from the American South. The area was run down. The city fathers wanted those people to leave when the war was over and didn't provide much in the way of services, but at least there were communities. Many of the people knew each other from back home. Boy Scout troop was started, churches existed, there was a baseball league, there was a community. Another picture of the west side. Basic Magnesium decided that they wanted to let Blacks live closer to the plant, so they built a place called Carver Park. And they expected thousands of Black people to move in there, but they didn't. About 71 did. And the reason that they didn't was several things. One is there was no sense of community there. On the west side there was community, and the other was there were threats of violence. And Blacks were justly afraid to move close to the plant because there were threats of violence, and there were reports that the local sheriff had announced that he wasn't going to stop anything that might happen. There were lots of things that happened that are described in my book that I won't even tell you about. But it was a very unpleasant place because of the racism. This is some of the magnesium ingots that were produced. Even though there was trouble at the plant, the working conditions were terrible. There was chlorine gas everywhere. It was hot, and the factory didn't have good ventilation. There was heavy-duty electricity. There were major pieces of equipment moving very heavy objects. It was a dangerous place to work. But despite all of that, and despite the racial tensions that were going on at the plant was very good at making magnesium. 83,000 tons of magnesium were made in a little less than 2 years. Much more magnesium than the United States needed, well surpassing the 9,000% increase in magnesium that was projected at the beginning of the war. And as a result, Basic Magnesium was shut down a little bit at a time over about 6 months until the end of 1944 when the plant was closed altogether. The people who were working there left. Henderson was not completely shut down, but over 50% of the houses were left unoccupied. Over 2/3 of the students who were in school disappeared. There's some interesting things to say. Women in Clark County became 55% of the electorate during the war. These are some interesting statistics that show the difference between how power in Nevada shifted from the north to the south. In 1940, Washoe County had 26,000 people, and Clark County had only 11,000. But during the war, those populations changed from 34,000 in Washoe to more than 50,000 in Clark. Voter registration changed. Between the beginning of the war and the end of the war, voter registration in Washoe County went up by only about 20 people. And about 6,000 people in Clark County. And the federal government's expenditures during the war were about $9,000 in Washoe County and $185,000 in Clark County. BMI was the largest construction project in the country. More steel was used to create that magnesium plant here in Henderson than was used to build the Empire State Building. This was the beginning of the shift of power. There are lots of other things that happened too. Gambling was taking off here more in the South than it was in the North for a lot of reasons. As I say, this was the beginning of the shift of power between the North and the South. This is an overview. I've written this book. It's got hundreds of stories in it. I've just briefly touched some of them. About 10% of the land area of the state was used for military purposes during the state. A tremendous contribution. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Any questions from the audience? Do we have any questions? Yeah.
Now, where, may I ask, did you get most of your photographs?
I got them in a lot of places. One tremendous source is the library here in Henderson.
Use the,
Yeah. I said one tremendous source was the library here in Henderson. But I got them everywhere. I got them from the Bureau of Reclamation. I visited 9 states looking at different archives for things that had to do with the state of Nevada during the Second World War.
What year did the newspaper actually become a newspaper in Henderson? Do you know? Does anybody know?
Henderson Home News?
Yeah. I think that's what it was way back then first, right? Home News?
Yeah, the Home News started 43.
I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. Every little base had its own newspaper. Every little town, every little base. Many towns had more than one newspaper. I mean, radio existed in most places. TV didn't. People saw newsreels at the movie theater. The main way that people got information was through newspapers.
Yeah. So would in fact the museum here, you would also know this, do they have like these pictures?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we have quite a few. We have a lot of World War II.
Are they like in
photographs.
the album or on display or what? I don't know.
Yeah, you need to go out to the museum and take a look. We actually have a town site house
Yeah, I
out
had no
there.
idea.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes, it's only open 7 days a week. So, and if you're like me and over 60, it is $1 to go through. So, yeah, you need to take a look at it.
Okay, awesome.
Now, any other questions?
I got to go through for free today.
We do comp the celebrities. Yes, sir.
A couple of comments.
Yeah.
Didn't the advent of air conditioning make a big difference between the north and the south? That's when people really flooded into Las Vegas, right? But to that time, it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah, but it wasn't air conditioning in World War II as much as swamp coolers. But yes, and we had swamp coolers in Henderson.
All of them have swamp coolers on top.
Exactly. There was hexagonal ones.
the IG Farben cell was used at titanium metals for recovery of magnesium, and there was the plans for the cell were coming from Germany, and it was one of the first ships was attacked and went down, and they got another set of plans and put that plant together in a matter of just weeks.
Yeah, I know that story. The military in Washington wanted people to come from England to describe the magnesium manufacturing process. And the first group that tried to come over, their ship was sunk, they lost the plans, and they had to ask for another set of plans to come over.
Yeah, but that was right during that war too.
It was probably just a little bit before the war. because they started clearing the ground here in Henderson in September of 1941, and of course the United States didn't enter the war until December 7th, 1941, a couple of months later.
One of the big problems with the manufacture of magnesium was that there's chlorine associated with it, with the manufacture that occurred later in life here. And getting rid of that chlorine was one of the major problems that occurred at the titanium plant, even though most of it was recycled.
A byproduct of manufacturing magnesium was chlorine gas that was used to kill people during the First World War.
Yeah.
But basic magnesium assured everybody that there's no problem. This is not going to cause tuberculosis. It's not going to hurt your lungs. And not only that, we've got a free hospital for anybody that's injured while on duty at the plant.
So how many people did they lose? Do we have a count where it was directly related to chlorine?
I imagine people were lost, just as I imagine people were lost to the above ground testing that occurred here in the South, but I don't think anybody ever counted. We didn't have an OSHA, we didn't protect workers like we try to today.
Yeah, Senator Keith Pittman, the one who died in office, was he really kept on ice at the NISPOC in Tonopah? Oh, come on.
No,
That story.
Well, tell the story anyway.
no,
Really?
yes.
There was McCarran on ice, wasn't it? No?
No. I'm playing Guy Rocher right now. History column, no,
No, it's too good of a story not to be true.
no.
Are you aware of all the tunneling underneath the city of Henderson? A lot of that was for fallout shelters and all that stuff.
No, I'm not aware of that. I know a lot of the magnesium plant was underground, and so they dug deep down, but no, I'm not aware of fallout shelters that were built. I mean, certainly they weren't during the Second World War.
Well, as an employee down there during that time, I was in a position to be able to go down into those tunnels. And it's amazing. They had hospitals, facilities down in there. They had all kinds of equipment, where people could get in there for injuries and that. And a lot of the tunnels, it's almost like a octopus down underneath there. It's spread out throughout the tunnels underneath there.
It's
Have you
interesting.
ever been in?
I haven't been in those, but I've been in the headquarters one out in Arden.
Oh, okay.
That's where the headquarters bomb shelter was for the valley. But this is all civil defense stuff. That's much later in the 50s.
It's amazing if you ever have the opportunity to go down into those, take some of the photos, be able to put this in here.
I'd be interested to do that, yeah. My knowledge of Nevada history is pretty limited from 1939 until September 2nd, 1945.
I have a question for Andy. He's been here a lot longer than I have. But we used to have a bomb shelter, I think, right over by where Victory Village was and what you call Noctilla Streets and over there. You probably remember, you probably remember the removal of it, I guess.
I know that some high school kids older than us actually did a lot of stuff there, but I think it was before my time.
That was actually the official city bomb shelter, and that was actually built by the city.
Oh, okay.
That was advertised, there's photographs of it, we've got stuff out at the museum about that one.
Oh, okay.
I never went down in that was gone before I got over here, but that was actually built by the city.
Mark, I was telling the young lady over here that I was out at the Lost City Museum and I actually got a pass for every museum in Nevada for just like, I think it was what, $20 or something?
Well, that's for the state museums. It's not for the county museums.
Oh.
But that's for the state museum. Great pass. Not saying you
But
shouldn't
if
have
I
it.
show that to them and give them $1, they'll still let me.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
That's because the state museums are more expensive.
Oh.
We're so cheap, for what you just get in. Unless you're with me and I can probably talk you.
Oh,
away.
okay.
Why is that?
Why
Like,
is what?
that it's only $1?
Because it should be free, but the county makes them charge you that.
No, I know, but anyway, I'm trying to understand their logic, so that's all.
You
I'll ask
want,
them.
you want
I'll
logic
ask
from
them.
any municipality, don't talk to me about that.
That's
all right.
I should, Carol, we should probably introduce you to Councilwoman Carrie Cox. Just
Hi.
give you a-
Thank you for coming, by the way.
And
But
may I-
understand, I worked for the county for 28 and a half
Yeah.
years. I
No
accept
sense,
their
huh?
retirement, but I can talk to you about working with the city and some things that need to change there. too.
Absolutely, and I am pleased to have
We already introduced you.
Dr. Monica Larson,
Yes.
who is our councilwoman-elect, and she's being sworn in on January 7th. You all should come.
I'll be there.
Is it at 4 o'clock? What time? Oh my gosh.
Don't miss
I'm
it.
not sure.
I haven't confirmed it.
Okay, there's a different time, but really, thank you
We'll be
for
there.
having us, and this is absolutely delightful. And Andy, thank you for all you do.
Yeah.
Oh, Becky, and we also have a planning commissioner here.
Yes,
Becky,
and I hope that you guys will come back, because this is how you will learn about our
Yeah.
history.
well, and
That's
I've
why
been,
I work with these guys.
yeah, but I've seen your presentations too, so I
Thank you.
think
I just had a comment, you guys were talking about Carver Park and then the bomb shelter. We were told that, that there was a bomb shelter and that we had to go back to our apartment immediately if we saw a plane or heard something like a loudspeaker, to go back to Carver Park, and they were all gonna follow to go into the bomb shelter. I mean, I remember this.
You
I
were
was
there. You
Yeah,
lived it.
I was 4 and 5 years old
Oh, yeah,
when
well,
that happened.
listen,
Yeah,
I grew up in Southern California, I remember ducking cover drills myself. Trust me, I remember those.
yeah, I can remember my brothers.
But that's part of the civil defense of the 50s and 60s. That's not World War II. That's a different part of our history. And we don't want to conflate the two of them. There were other things going on during World War II, and Carver Park was built during World War II, but
Right.
the bomb shelter was actually built much later. That's not a World War II portion of our history.
But
So
like the
I don't think that's
The
easy.
service
No.
things that you're talking about, I mean, that's happening. I'm interested, what enticed you or encouraged you to write this book, Jeff?
I've read about the Second World War for a long period of time because it's so interesting and it's so right in our faces today. When you hear somebody say, well, let's get rid of NATO, God, NATO's kept us safe for 80 years. Please don't get rid of NATO. Don't change what happened as a result of World War II, which we won. And then I moved to Nevada about 40 years ago and fell in love with the state driving around it. And so I started going to the library and reading the newspapers from that period of time. And I found this story about a saddle manufactured for Admiral Halsey. I thought, wow, what a great story. And I kept reading and I kept reading. And when I had more than 100 stories and different facts, I thought this could be a book. And so I worked on a book. And after I retired from being a judge, I was able to finish it.
Judge, do you know Michael Holland? He's got the jewelry place on Water Street, by any chance?
No, I don't.
No. Coincidentally, to you being here tonight, a friend of mine and I had to go over there for something today. And he brings out, we told him, you were here and we were gonna come over here tonight and invited him. He brings out a box, no kidding, cardboard box, full of way back to what you're talking about. I mean, 40s, late 40s, that's why I asked that question about the newspapers. He has newspaper articles, he's got stuff you need to meet this man.
Well, I hope he preserves it by giving it to the museum, or the Historical Society, or special collections at the university.
Because the Henderson Historical Society actually encourages that. And I had a dear friend whose father lives in Utah now and donated a whole box to the museum. And I gave it to HHS, remember that, guys?
Yep.
And they gave most of it to the museum, but that's how they get stuff. People give it to them.
History disappears unless effort is made to preserve it. During the Second World War, we created 16-inch gun barrels for our battleships. These things weighed 120 tons each. They were on the ground at Hawthorne, more than a dozen of them. About 5 or 6 years ago, was it? They cut them up for scrap. Just outrageous. Just outrageous. They would have existed for thousands of years. They weren't rusting. They were huge pieces of metal. If you don't try to preserve history, even the things that look like they're going to be there forever disappear.
And we cannot make these gun barrels today. We don't have the industrial ability to make these. They saved one, and that's it.
Just a couple of weeks ago, I was given a display case filled with medals of a pilot from Reno who's very well known. His kids didn't like him or something and were going to throw it in the trash. And it ended up with me because people know I care about the Second World War and will do things to preserve these things. My favorite World War II relic is I've got a little plastic statue about that big of a young woman who's clearly pregnant, and on the base of the statue it says Kilroy was here.
Is that Kilroy's mother?
I think it might be
I think that was
her
his
girlfriend.
Well, are you ready to sign some books?
Sure.
Yay, I'm
All
in
right.
line.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.